Matthew Kaurana Galizia, dobitnik Pulitzera, naš je gost. Matthew, hello and welcome.
Thank you very much.
We are recording this on Friday. We are seeing unbelievable scenes from the funeral of Palestinian journalist Abu Akleh. She's the fourth women journalist killed this week. How does it feel for you?
It feels like taking a punch, but I also understand that for her family and her friends, it's a million times worse than that. You don't even want to believe that this is happening, except that it's real. So the anger, the frustration, the hurt, I can imagine exactly what they're feeling.
We have war in Ukraine, and the type of a criminal being exercised over the journalists in war is basically increasing. Journalists are targets, legitimate now targets in wars. How did we come to this?
A journalist is never, ever a legitimate target, never. I think that journalists have become more effective at doing their work. They've become better, even though there are some people in politics who want to blame journalists for absolutely everything, saying that we're out to get them and so on. No, journalists are becoming much better at doing their job. And I see the increase in attacks as sort of a direct reprisal for the increased effectiveness of the work of journalists. We've become better at uncovering the truth. Our work has become more necessary. And we are bearing the brunt of these kinds of reprisals because authorities are increasingly not there for us, I believe. They're just not... They haven't sort of caught up with the kind of work that journalists are doing. They haven't become as effective as journalists are. So we really need more effective criminal justice. With the cases of journalists who have been murdered in Palestine, the investigation that's being asked for from the International Criminal Court is more necessary than ever before, because criminal justice is required. Without that, it's impossible to move on.
You've mentioned criminal justice. We have, let's say, two ways. One is attacks on freedom of speech, freedom of the media worldwide, and the second one is the personal safety of journalists, which the most radical case was the case of your mom. What she was plunging into was corruption, was connection with big business, politics, and the corruption is its core, and that is something that only, I think, journalism today can tackle, and that is the core of global problems that we see, you know, from tax evasions to whatever repercussions we have in our life. Is now a time, and how, to solve this, or can it be solved at all in any case, during from the law perspective, from how do you see the future of journalism as such?
So while some politicians and people in business and organized criminals are attacking journalists directly, they are also doing another thing which is hidden from the public, and it's going to be increasingly hidden as more journalists are eliminated, either because they're murdered or because they're forced out of the profession because of libel suits, because of slaps, or their publication is shut down. This other thing that is being done is that institutions are also being attacked and eroded. So politicians are trying to bring universities under their direct control. They're trying to bring police under greater control, the judiciary under greater political control. They're trying to destabilize with corruption and by taking away funding international institutions like the Council of Europe, for example, which is a very effective tool in attacking organized crime and corruption. So, I mean, politicians have to, good politicians need to realize and be reminded, and this is some of the work that I do, that it's all very fine to talk about constructive politics and this kind of thing, and to spread a nice message. But they also have to take action. That action is making sure that there are people within authorities who are able to go after the bad guys, and making sure that those bad guys are stopped when they try and destroy bureaucracies, when they try and destroy multilateral organizations, when they try and destroy sources of international cooperation, like the ICC, like the Council of Europe, like the UN. These bodies are important. We need to work together to solve global problems like corruption, climate change, organized crime.
Talking about global problems, do you think that the solution for journalism is to globalize journalism in a sense that we cooperate as journalists globally and find the public funding to how to say, to produce the important investigative things?
You need a bit of everything. So what I tell everyone is there's no one best kind of journalism. There is no one kind of journalism that should be used everywhere, sort of like McDonald's. It doesn't exist. There is space for everything. There's space for TV, space for radio, space for investigative journalism. Yes, there is also space for tabloid journalism. They're all needed in a democracy. And there's room for all of them.
Talking about what you just said, fighting corruption, how important is not to let impunity? What we have, for example, in Croatia, investigations of ministers, of high-level, I don't know, businessmen that, you know, are being investigated and then, you know, stopped or watered down in the court. So in scenario that you've mentioned, how important it is and how can, you know, journalism help this in this time of huge influencing and huge new bubble of fake news and disinformation?
I mean, there is a lot of work being done by NGOs. Remind me the name of the organization that does this fact-checking work in
Faktograf.
Exactly. Yeah. That work is extremely important, and I sort of can't overstate the importance of units that are dedicated solely to fact-checking. They do invaluable work. It goes hand in hand with wider investigative journalism, with local journalism. So these things go together. And I think for journalists who do regular investigative journalism, it feels very good to know that there's another team out there that is doing this invaluable fact-checking work. And I do think it is a kind of public service that needs to be supported with public funding.
What do you think? You are also a software engineer, as I understand, together with being, you know, data journalist and journalist and an activist basically in the field of media and journalism in that regard. How important technology is for us in a sense that it can help us in all those things that you mentioned?
Well, without the assistance of sophisticated tools, it is very difficult for journalists nowadays to do investigative work, because organized crime and corruption has become completely international. It is not isolated to a single country. Criminal groups that are involved in bribery, in drug trafficking, human trafficking, they work across borders. For them, there are no borders. They use companies in Panama and bank accounts in Switzerland. So to investigate these kinds of networks, we need access to data from different countries, from different companies. And to be able to search this data, to use it in our investigations, we need software tools. This is why news organizations have been investing in this kind of work. The problem is that it's extremely expensive.
Talking about, you've mentioned, you know, bank accounts in Switzerland and tax havens in the Caribbean. The thing that your mother was investigating was, you know, somewhere there in the Panama Papers. How do you feel that, you know, it's been now how long? Five years? You know, those guys are not behind the bars.
Well, they are behind bars in the sense that they're in custody, but their trial hasn't started yet. And this is a problem which is really particular to Malta. We have the slowest justice system in the entire European Union. Way, way, way slower than any other EU member state, by far. If you were to think of it as a marathon, you know, the people at the front of the race winning gold, winning silver, I mean, they're the fittest, you know, the gold medalists, and then Malta is the kind of obese guy right at the end who is 10 minutes behind everyone else in the marathon. It's really like that. I mean, we are really, really slow. And I see the reluctance within government to properly deal with these problems as a reluctance to really attack the heart of the links between business and politics, of the links between organized criminal groups in business and those in politics. There is a reluctance to attack this kind of closeness.
Why is this? Because, you know, she now became worldwide symbol. I know it's your mother, it's, you know, but you talk about it. You've put your energy and professional life into, you know, driving this until the end. How come that they're still doing this? How come that they're evading, you know, to go into the core of it?
These links have been built up over many, many years, and it has created a system where political parties in Malta are dependent on illicit financing, or dependent on getting away with breaking the law. And this is especially true for the party in government. So this is where this huge reluctance to reform the justice system, to completely attack organized crime stems from. Everyone knows that the problem is our court system, our justice system. Even people within senior levels of government admit this, but they are totally unwilling to do something about it.
I think that maybe we should just repeat once again. Prime Minister and one very influential businessman who basically financed the group. That's the level. I think for our public it's important to hear who are these guys who were free enough to think it's okay to put explosive under a car and kill a journalist in one European country a year after Malta presided basically the European Union.
When you think about it, it's not just 5 years. The information about the links between officials and secret offshore companies, payments from Azerbaijan, this was revealed in 2016. So we're now talking 6 years, actually more than 6 years, since criminal organizations were supposed to have started. The public inquiry into the circumstances of my mother's assassination, which is something my family fought for years, and the government pushed back against consistently. But we managed to get it with the support of international organizations like the Council of Europe. Established these links, and it very strongly criticized the inaction of the police. It led to the firing of police officers in senior roles. But apparently that has not been enough to really sort of light a fire under the government and for them to start sort of panicking about the fact that, you know, it is becoming really an emergency, that these investigations really have to move forward. We need prosecutions.
Talking about this pan-European space, you've established together with European institutions an award for investigative journalism named by your mother. Interesting, we now have a President of European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, who is Maltese. Do you think that Europe, you are mentioning Council of Europe and its mechanisms from OLAF, fighting corruption, and all the others who are there on our citizens' disposal, basically. Do you think that, you know, this and focusing on the rule of law in Europe can help all of us in the future?
Of course. I mean, a journalist being murdered in Malta is a problem for all of Europe. My mother was investigating organized crime that, I mean, crossed through Italy, Albania, Montenegro, Azerbaijan, Spain, you know, Brussels, Strasbourg, Paris. I mean, name a European country, and her investigations touched upon it in some way. So the extent of corruption has just sort of reached every corner of not just the European Union, but even beyond that. So yes, it is a problem for every single person in Europe. Don't forget that when you murder a journalist, when a journalist is murdered, it's not just that person's life which is being taken away. It's the right to know for every single person in Europe, which is also being taken away.
During the pandemic, we here, and then I saw in Europe, we have a huge hatred of certain groups, you know, who are thinking that there's no pandemic against journalism. They were openly attacked. We have cases in our neighboring Slovenia that, you know, journalists were attacked. We live in very uncertain time when, you've mentioned it earlier, our, you know, global international order based on some kind of rules is shaking the ground. We saw, you know, Russia's invasion on Ukraine. Freedom of speech in this regard in Europe, do you think that people are aware of what you said still of importance of journalism when they have this, when they see big tech giants, you know, when they see their bubbles on Facebooks, you know, how do we reclaim importance of journalism today?
I mean, I don't think it sort of falls on the shoulders of journalists as a burden to explain how important the work they do is. Journalists speak to politicians every day, and we have a codependent relationship. So we need champions, people within government, people within civil society organizations that have nothing to do with journalism, perhaps, or think they have nothing to do with it. We need these kinds of champions to speak up on our behalf. And I'm really happy to say that we have found some of those champions. There are people within the police force in Malta, within the police forces of other countries, who recognize the importance of investigative journalism and really champion what we do. There are people within the European Commission, Vera Jourova and her cabinet, the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, her predecessor, David Sassoli. These are people who have all championed investigative journalism. It would help, though, to have more of that, I think. If you are a politician who wants to do good, then you can benefit from a good relationship with journalists. I think it works both ways.
How would you encourage whistleblowers, for example?
The only way to encourage whistleblowers is to show that you can protect them. Unfortunately, if you're working in a very sort of extreme environment where it is almost impossible to protect a whistleblower because of government spying and eavesdropping, and then it becomes difficult, you know, to earn the trust of whistleblowers. It becomes a sort of hindrance to your work as a journalist. But the number one way that you can sort of encourage sources to come forward is to show that you are a trustworthy person as a journalist, and that you will do everything to protect your sources. When it comes to government, the same applies. Governments have to be able to show that they have authorities that have autonomy, independence, that they are not under political control, and only in this way will whistleblowers come forward to those authorities. For the end,
maybe as an inspiration to young journalists, because, you know, you're much younger than me, I'm a little bit younger than your mother, there are new generations coming in, working in new environment. How was it for you to win a Pulitzer knowing, knowing of your mother's legacy behind, and what will be your message to the newcomers in journalism?
So it was a team that won the Pulitzer. I mean, I was part of a very big team of people. So I always feel a kind of embarrassment when people mention that. I really think that this kind of teamwork in investigative journalism is important. My mother had hundreds of sources. She wasn't just a person working on her own. Politicians may have isolated her as a result of her investigative work, but I think the answer to that kind of isolation is more teamwork. So I would really like to send this message to young people who have an interest in anti-corruption work in journalism, that being part of an investigative team, being part of a unit is really, really helpful. There's an immense amount that you can learn from more experienced journalists, from more experienced activists, if you choose to go down that route.
Matthew, Gaurana Galizia, thank you so much for being our guest and for being here.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thank you.